My name is Casey Martin. I'm the president of Diversified. We appreciate your effort to be here with us virtually. I would like to extend a big thank you to all of my colleagues for their support in making this event a success. It wouldn't have been possible without the support of our entire team. We have a great team who is passionate about the success of your communities and providing support and education to our volunteer board members. We would also like to take a moment to thank our board members for your support in choosing Diversified as your management company. We do have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A on the right side of the screen. Our moderator will be answering any questions that arise throughout the presentation. If you missed something in the webinar and would like to review, a recording and a copy of the presentation with notes will be available by request from your community manager. I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's presenters. First, we have Amanda Molnix. Amanda joined Diversified in 2018 as a community manager. Amanda's role includes assisting the board in effectively managing associations. Prior to joining the team, Amanda attended the University of Northern Colorado, earning a dual degree in journalism with an emphasis in public relations and advertising. Next, we have Brittany Rogers. Brittany joined Diversified in 2016 as a community manager. Brittany also serves as Diversified's education coordinator and actively works to help develop and promote education for our team, as well as planning and execution of events such as this. Brittany entered the HOA industry in 2014, and through the years she has gained extensive knowledge and experience managing HOA communities. Next, we have Tabitha Burrill. Tabitha joined Diversified in 2016 as Director of Team Development. Tabitha's primary role includes managing a portfolio of associations, as well as the oversight and development of a team of managers. Tabitha attended the University of Colorado here in Colorado Springs, earning a dual degree in leadership and communication. Tabitha has previously served as the chair for the Education Committee for the Southern Colorado chapter of CAI, where she developed education for community manager, board members, and vendor partners throughout Southern Colorado. Finally, we have Melissa Garcia. Melissa is an attorney with Altitude Community Law with over 20 years of experience. She is a frequent lecturer and participant in seminars on community associations. Melissa speaks nationally as well as locally on issues facing associations. In 2012, Melissa received the Educator of the Year Award, and in 2018, Melissa received the Committee Chair of the Year Award, both for the CAI Southern Colorado chapter. We will be going through a few key points in this presentation. Amanda Molnix will start with the purpose and best practices for annual meetings. Brittany Rogers will be reviewing the purpose of the board meeting and key information for running board meetings efficiently and effectively. And Tabitha Burrill will be reviewing some essential responsibilities of the board, tips for running effective board meetings, and best practices when it comes to conflict at board meetings. In collaboration with Melissa Garcia, each section will give details on what is legally required and consequences for not following important meeting procedures and protocol. I'll go ahead and hand things off to Amanda, who will start by discussing annual meetings.
Thank you, Casey. I'm gonna jump right into annual meetings. I'm sure most of you are aware that annual meeting season is right around the corner. Community managers do a lot of preparation for this big meeting of the membership. We're getting budgets approved, booking meeting locations, staying on top of mailing deadlines, and working directly with the board to ensure a smooth meeting. Now, this meeting is required by law for every corporate entity, even if considered a nonprofit. There are very specific guidelines in each community's governing documents that must be followed. The notice of the meeting must be sent within a written time frame. There's also a quorum requirement for how many homeowners must be present or represented by proxy in order to hold official business. It's important to achieve quorum and to encourage homeowners to attend the meeting. In the virtual meeting world, quorum can be reached by ballots received by the given deadline. If quorum is not reached, then the meeting is held as a town hall or informational meeting. No voting can take place. Now, if you're new to an HOA, you may be asking, what is the purpose of an annual meeting? The annual meeting is a yearly meeting for homeowners to vote on 3 separate matters. The first objective is the election of the board for any open seats. At the meeting, voting will take place by secret ballot, and a volunteer will count the ballots. The person with the most votes will be elected. If the election is uncontested, then the person running will be elected by acclamation to fill the position. If quorum is not reached by homeowners, then the current board has the authority to appoint someone onto the board. The second objective of the annual meeting is to approve the prior year's meeting minutes. Similar to a regular board meeting, the prior meeting minutes are to be reviewed and approved. Once approved, they can be published. We send a copy of the minutes with the mailers, so the owners are ready to approve the minutes at the meeting. If quorum is not reached, then the minutes are not approved and will carry on to the next year for approval. And finally, the homeowners need to ratify the upcoming year's budget. The budget's already approved by the board prior to the meeting. A copy of the budget is mailed with the notice. At the meeting, we open up the floor for questions regarding the budget. The voting matter is to ratify the budget. The homeowners must be given the opportunity to veto the budget. The membership can veto the budget with 51% vote of the entire community unless higher percentage is stated in your declarations. The budget will reflect any increases in expenses for the upcoming year, and it'll serve notice to the homeowners on how much assessments will be in 2022. So now we've gone over kind of the purpose of the annual meeting. We have a few best practices to share. Now remember, this is not a board meeting. The board should not conduct any board business at the annual meeting. Try and stick to the agenda and don't drive off course. It's best to keep things positive. Talk about the accomplishments of the community in the past year. Come prepared with a few talking points and updates for the community. If there's a hot button issue, then educate early, get ahead of the issue. We suggest a cover letter with the annual meeting notice to cover those issues. Maybe the assessments are increasing for the first time in a few years. The board may want to draft a response and an explanation on the reasoning behind those increases. Another tip is to utilize the experts in the HOA business. You can have a guest speaker, such as an HOA insurance broker, to speak on the importance of holding an HO6 policy. The board can invite vendors who can help answer questions that may arise from the attending residents. Qualified experts can help provide confidence on particular topics. And the annual meeting should include time for members' input. Most members don't attend regular board meetings, so this is a time for the homeowners to speak to the board. We do recommend setting a certain amount of time per question so that the meeting keeps moving along. The board is not required to take action to address the statements made during the meeting. It's okay to say, the board is not prepared to respond, we'll look into it and follow up. Or invite them to the next scheduled board meeting if they bring up topics that are not on the annual meeting agenda. Now I'm going to turn to Melissa Garcia.
Okay, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And I am the attorney. So of course I'm going to bring all the legal stuff and legal jargon into this because, you know, you may be having fun having an annual meeting, but then here comes the attorney telling you all the things you're doing wrong. I could have a whole class on annual meetings and what you should be thinking about. But just first, we're going to just skim through the surface. I mean, we already heard a lot of great things that were brought up, some good practices, but the legal lesson number one in sum is know the law and your governing documents. Why? Because boards are exposed to liability if they don't know the law or their documents. And this is particularly important when it comes to annual meetings, because with annual meetings, if you don't follow the law, then you get claims like the election was invalid, or because it was conducted illegally, or the budget was not approved because you failed to follow whatever proper protocol. And also, there's been a lot of changes in the law over the last past 10 years that are technical in nature. And so, you know, if your documents are old, then 9 times out of 10, you're not doing something right. And maybe there's 1 or 2 technical violations. It's not going to matter much cumulatively, but it could cumulatively pack a punch and land you in court. So that's the first thing. And then obviously adopt and follow a conduct of meetings policy. Let's go into a little bit more with respect to the requirements. So Annual meetings, notice, we already discussed the fact that you need to keep within the time frames, but I wanted to go into that just a little bit more. So you need to have at least 10 days, not less than 10 days, and not more than 50 days prior notice to all owners. The notice has to be physically posted in a conspicuous place. It can't be emailed in lieu of mailed notice, and everybody wants to do that. A lot of nuances, follow them. Quorum, it was mentioned that you can't take action without quorum. Well, that's true, period. You cannot take action without quorum except budget ratification. And if you don't have enough people show up, then don't elect directors. That's where I see associations doing it anyway. That's improper. The directors whose terms have naturally expired, actually, they continue to serve until the next election. So even if they want to be off the board, unless they resign. Proxies, I wanted to really quickly talk about the fact that proxies must be allowed, even if the bylaws say no proxies, and even if the bylaws try to cap the proxies in some way. And then ballots, of course, secret ballots have to be used in contested elections. These are just some of the nuances that are in the new law and maybe in your governing documents that you need to follow, or there are consequences. And then I bolded conduct of meetings policy, because if you don't have a conduct of meetings policy, which is really the ground rules of the meeting, where we mentioned a second ago, setting time frames, making sure that people act professionally, making sure that they address the chair, all that good stuff. If you don't have that, then the consequences are losing control of the meeting. All of a sudden, the one hour meeting becomes a 5-hour meeting. You're taking improper motions. We had this situation once where somebody failed to put in the notice that there was an amendment that was going to happen, and they took a motion to move forward with voting on the amendment, did all this great stuff, all this discussion, and it's improper because it wasn't in the notice. And you should, if you don't know that, you could, your decisions in that last bullet point are subject to challenge. If you take those improper motions, then you're setting unreasonable expectations because everybody thinks, well, we did everything right. And then after the meeting, it's challenged because no, you didn't follow protocol. And then finally, if you're not following protocol and you are violating whatever the rules are in your governing documents or the law, then that loses credibility for the board. If they can't follow the policies and they can't follow their own governing documents, then why should we follow them as members of the community? So things to remember.
Awesome, thank you, Melissa. Now that we've gone over annual meetings, I'm going to dive right into regular board meetings. I know you're probably thinking, we have regular board meetings all the time. Why is she wasting our time with this? We just thought it would be a good refresher, as sometimes we get so caught up in seeing each other, especially with COVID, and socializing that we can forget why we're meeting. First, I'm going to talk about the purpose of a board meeting. For starters, it is to make important decisions, such as selecting a new landscaper or approving the new budget, etc. This is also where you'll be touching base with your manager on any current projects or action item updates. The board meeting is not a time to sweat the small stuff, but focus on the big picture issues. It's also not a place to hold detailed discussions over proposals. That is when you want to have a working session. What is a working session? Though I'm sure most of you know, working session is a time for the board to meet unofficially to discuss items in preparation for the board meeting. This is a perfect time to discuss the draft budget or proposals between vendors in detail. However, remember, you cannot make decisions at make official decisions at this working session. Typically, managers do not attend these working sessions, but it is important to communicate any discussions you've had at those sessions with your manager. And that way your manager can come prepared to the board meeting. Melissa, I know you also have some great information regarding working sessions.
Yes, so even though everything that was said was entirely accurate. However, I wanted to let everybody know that the way the legislation is moving towards transparency, working sessions, the whole trend of that might go away, because right now what we think is, well, a working session is an opportunity for the board to just discuss and gather without making decisions. But more and more we're seeing courts look at any kind of gathering by the board as a meeting. And if it's considered a meeting, even if there's no decision, then it has to be open to all members. So just realize we're moving in that direction. We already see it in California, you see it in Florida and a couple of other states, that any gathering is considered a meeting. So my advice for many boards today is you know what, start getting used to it and start allowing homeowners to attend. Possibly, just remember, in a working session, they're there to observe. They're not there to hijack the meeting or interrupt or interact like at a regular meeting, but just kind of get used to it because that's where the law is moving towards.
Very true. Next, we're going to move on to the order of business. Most, if not all, boards follow some form of parliamentary procedure, or more commonly known as Robert's Rules of Order, when making decisions or motions at board meetings. This is important because this enables the board to conduct business in an efficient and orderly manner. It also ensures the rule of majority and protects the rights of absent and minority board members. As you know, the typical flow of a motion is the board discusses the decision, then a board member puts a motion on the floor, such as I move to select this proposal by ABC Company. Another member will then second the motion. Then the vote for the motion will take place when the president calls for those in favor or denial. And remember, majority rules. There are a few key principles to remember with parliamentary procedure. For starters, if there are any Star Trek fans out there, in the words of Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, meaning that the needs of the association come first before any one's decision. All members are equal, so therefore the president is not more important than the secretary, and the secretary is not more important than the member at large. Also remember, a quorum must be present. Also remember to vote on one thing at a time. Full debate is allowed. Remember to focus on the issue, not the people involved, and I say again, majority rules. Just because one member votes against a motion does not veto that entire motion. Melissa, I would like to see what you have to add on parliamentary procedure.
So, of course, here comes legal lesson number 2 with my gavel. When the gavel fails, there are pitfalls. So I think Robert Rules of Order, they're great in terms of structuring the meeting and making sure that it flows. And maybe there's too much discussion on a particular item and you need to move that agenda. So you say, okay, let's put the motion on the floor, and you start going through that process. It's a nice way to end the discussion when it's been going on way too long and to move that meeting along. But on the other hand, there are some pitfalls. So let's talk a little bit about that. So requirements. First of all, remember that you have to follow the requirements of your governing documents. And so a lot of them don't even mention Robert's Rules of Orders. I just think that this is a very important, very popular parliamentary procedure manual that people use. But if your documents don't say that they're required, or if they defer to some other kind of, rules of order, then you're required to follow your governing documents. If they're silent, you don't have to follow the Robert's Rules of Order either. And it could be even contrary to law. I'm not a parliamentarian, so I don't know all the nuances of Robert's Rules, but I know that there's something in there that says something like the president, the board, who is a board member, is not allowed to vote except in terms of ties. And I've heard that or seen that somewhere. Well, that's contrary to Colorado law and your governing documents. The board member is supposed to vote like everyone else. So check your governing documents, make sure that what you're following is actually required, or if there's some other process you're supposed to follow, then follow that instead. We don't want you violating technical nuances if you don't even know about them. So look for that term, even though it could be used just to establish, again, that nice flow and make it structured. Now, the consequences, or I'll say the pitfalls are, I think with Robert's Rules, I think they're great with some of the larger associations, again, to move the meeting, but they could be unnecessarily cumbersome for some of the smaller associations, or maybe the ones that already are governed in a really good way, and having to say, okay, point of order and this and that, and follow the very technical steps could actually stifle the discussion. I've seen it happen where and it was an annual meeting and everything was going swimmingly, and then all of a sudden, after this big discussion, they said something out of order in terms of the regimented process for Robert's Rules, and somebody stood up with their book and saying, point of order, and was trying to reintroduce the motion in the correct way. Everybody was getting really frustrated, and it ended up them not even moving forward on that action because they were frustrated. They didn't know how to say the motion correctly. And it was problematic, particularly because there's so many versions of Robert's rules and you don't know if you have the right one or they have the right one, and you might get into these parliamentary fights. Also, if you do say that you're going to hold this meeting strictly according to Robert's Rules of Order, and maybe you cite the correct citation or the updated version and all that, and then you don't abide by it and the technical nuances, then later on somebody could challenge that decision as illegal because you didn't follow the conduct of order in Robert's Rules of Orders. I mean, you really don't want to do that. So even though it could be a great manual to use in a more of a summary fashion, I wouldn't get lost in all the specific details of it, and I would be careful if these issues come up.
Awesome. Lastly, I want to go over meeting minutes. I would first like to start off by saying that there is a reason they are called minutes and not hours of a meeting. I know that all of you are volunteers and have a lot on your shoulders and probably feel a lot of pressure from your fellow homeowners to make the right decisions. And you may also feel inclined to put as much detail in the minutes as possible so those who missed the meeting can feel like they were there. Well, what if I were to tell you you don't need to do that? Typically, the board secretary is the one who takes the minutes. However, the board can also request their manager to take minutes, such as Diversified's contract does include taking minutes for board meetings. What do you want to include in the minutes? You want to make sure there's contextual information, such as the date, time, and location. You also want to include notable individuals who were present, namely the board, guest speakers, and any other invited guests. After that, the minutes mostly contain recorded motions. You want to record key actions and decisions only and avoid including commentary between board members and homeowners. You will also want to include the decision of the approval of the last board meeting minutes and the ratification of any and all decisions that were made in between meetings, such as decisions that were made via email. You will also want to make sure you include if and when the board went into an executive session and when the board meeting was adjourned. And again, make sure you exclude commentary or discussions from the minutes. I'm now going to turn it back over to Melissa Garcia, who is going to expand a little more on taking minutes and is also going to take over the topic of executive sessions and when they are necessary.
Okay, legal lesson number 3. They're supposed to be minutes, not hours, and everything that was just said was correct. I think one thing that we want to get everything in there, and because maybe we're passionate about a particular topic and you want to show, here's all the stuff that we discussed and we made that informed decision. And I know that it's easy to fall into that pattern, but it could also be a problem as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the legal requirements, and then we'll talk about some of the consequences. Now, minutes, previous to maybe 5 years ago, there was nothing that said how long you're supposed to keep minutes, or there still isn't anything in the law that says these are the exact things that you have to keep in the minutes. But what was just discussed was really best practices and what we recommend as well. But now, minutes of all board meetings as well as annual meetings, they have to be kept permanently. That means forever. So just, it doesn't mean you have to go and recreate all the minutes that you didn't take for maybe some of the other board meetings, but just from here on forward, you really ought to make sure that you're complying, because again, it's an exposure to liability if you don't follow the clear requirements of the law, and that's one of them. The record statute has been updated the last couple of years to be very clear about the list of records you're supposed to keep, and this is one of them, and again, it must be kept permanently. Now, email votes, I wanted to talk a little bit about those, because when you are, as a board, acting outside of a meeting, so that means via email, then the decisions of that meeting are still supposed to be open for the members to review, to see how that came about. And there's particular procedures that you have to follow as well. When you're acting outside of a meeting, first you have to defer to your bylaws, but if your bylaws don't say anything, there's particular requirements per statute that you have to follow. But in terms of minutes and email votes, what the statute says is once you're done with the email vote, which means you've sent it out to everybody and you've made the decision, all the board members responded and said yes or no, you're supposed to take those decisions and then bring them and attach them to the minutes of the next physical meeting. So just don't like have the meeting via email and then get rid of those emails, keep those emails and attach them to the minutes of the next meeting. Now, the other thing you have to remember too is all that discussion leading up to that decision by email, all of that is also open to the members for inspection and to review, because again, since you're not having a meeting, they don't get to see and observe the decision-making process, so they're allowed to read those emails that lead up to those meeting decisions or email decisions. So the lesson with that is really just to act, to type. My rule is usually pretend that whatever you're typing in that email thread is something that you're going to say out loud at a meeting, because they're going to see it and it might be taken out of context. So again, you capture decisions, not the discussion. That was said a couple of times. That is totally true, but I will give a caveat here under the consequences. So first of all, consequences. If you put too much, and I know a lot of people like to say a lot of things in the meetings, they really want to get every point across. But as I put in quotes, probably a lot of you have seen this, or I'm dating myself when I say this is the thing that they always say in Law and Order, that show, that old show. I know there's new shows, this Suits, or I don't even know. Anyway, I don't watch TV anymore, but everything you can say, everything you say can and will be used against you. That is true. And the more you put in, particularly when you're discussing that something that might expose you to liability, the more it could be blown up in court, and all of a sudden something that you said that might sound innocuous while you're saying it is going to just blow up on the screen and just be taken out of context. So be careful. You really ought not to do that. Again, just capture the decisions, not the discussion. However, there's also too little in terms of minutes when it comes to certain types of decisions and certain types of actions, mainly those that hit the pocket, those that where you spend a lot of money and people are scrutinizing your decisions. You want to maybe put a little bit more in there because you want to show that you made an informed decision. You want to show that, hey, we did consult the attorney or we talked to whatever expert, and you might want to document a little bit more in those situations, but that's really the exception, not the rule. Okay, and I think that's all I have for minutes. Let's go ahead and move towards the next thing, executive session. Legal lesson number 4, transparency. It's a gentle shove towards transparency. Over the years, the legislature, it's clear, and this is in all states, not just Colorado, but it's clear that everybody's wanting to move towards transparency. And so you'll see it in all the new laws as well as the old laws. And this is one of them, executive sessions. For those of you who don't know what executive sessions are, it really is just closed session. It's an opportunity, it's a privilege for the board to go into closed session in order to talk about private things. But, and it's a privilege. I do want to say that you don't have to go into executive session, but most of the time you're probably gonna want to do it. But the main thing is Colorado law limits executive sessions to these categories, and that is it. I see so many boards go into executive session for the wrong reason, or they go into executive session for one of these categories, and then they stay in even though they're done speaking about that category, and they start talking about all these other things. That's a no-no. You want to make sure that you limit it to these categories, and really quickly, matters regarding employees, that's easy. Management contract, that's the only contract you can go into executive session for. You can't go into executive session to discuss landscaping contracts, for example, or attorney contracts. Attorney-client privilege discussion, as well as legal opinions. So if I or another attorney is at the meeting, you can go into executive session, or if you're discussing advice from the attorney, you can go into executive session to discuss that advice. Investigation of criminal misconduct, that's not a covenant violation hearing. And I know a lot of boards go in to executive session for covenant violation hearings, even though there's no category for it. This is criminal misconduct, not just a regular violation. Matters constitutionally, statutorily, or judicially protected from public disclosure. There's no laundry list, but I can think of things like if you're going to discuss bank account numbers, or if you're going to discuss somebody's disability in their medical records. And then finally, the catch-all, and this is what I see a lot of boards using inappropriately, matters which constitute invasion of individual privacy. So you might think, for example, that privacy means collection of delinquent assessments. So we as a board can go into closed session to discuss delinquent assessments. That's inappropriate. The legislature is pretty clear that homeowners have the right to know how you're collecting the assessments and how you're enforcing those violations, such as the violation hearings. So I would not use that as a blanket way of going into executive session. Instead, you can use it on a case-by-case basis, such as if somebody comes to you and says, please don't discuss my delinquent account in open session. Here's the reasons why. You know, I mean, I'm disabled and I didn't get my disability check on time, those kinds of things. The other thing too is there's a fear that you're giving away private information that's going to be really embarrassing for people. So what you want to do in open session when you're talking about collections is not name the person, not name the address, but just say, we have 5 collections accounts. Here's what we're doing on each one of them. So again, you're giving the information without going into private information, and you're not naming anybody. So the consequences if you go into executive session for the wrong reason, homeowners get suspicious, all of a sudden you're acting behind closed door, making secret decisions, you get that loss of trust. If you're hiding something, why should we trust you moving forward, particularly if they find out that you did discuss something inappropriately in executive session. Your decision itself, if you went into executive session and acted on something, and then it turns out you were never supposed to be in executive session, that could be subject to legal challenge. And finally, liability exposure. A lot of the claims against the boards are they're not being transparent, and this leads to breach of fiduciary duty type claims. So, and the last thing I didn't mention was minutes. Make sure that when you go into executive session, you announce in the minutes that whatever category you're going into executive session for, and then when you come out, if you make a decision appropriately in executive session, then announce what that decision is.
Great, thank you so much for that, Melissa. I know there's always kind of a gray area with understanding with executive sessions, so I think that's super helpful. Next, we're going to move into board member responsibilities and meeting preparedness. You know, as we discussed earlier, the regular meetings of the board are to be conducted as a business meeting. This is the time for the board to make important decisions for the association. In order to hold a productive board meeting, it is imperative that the board members come prepared to the meeting, ready to decide on the items on the agenda. So let's start with that, the meeting agenda. So as a board member, the first step is to review the agenda in the board packet ahead of the meeting. The agenda really is the key to facilitating the meeting and should be utilized as the schedule for the items the board will be reviewing, discussing, and voting on. Your community manager at Diversified, we provide you with the draft meeting agenda 5 business days prior to the meeting, and the board should be reviewing this for any additions or changes, maybe new business items that need to be added prior to the manager starting the creation of the board packet. Once the agenda is completed, the community manager will then create the board packet, which includes all the supplemental information for the agenda items. It'll include the monthly financials, maybe roof repair proposals, everything that the board will need to review in order to make an informed decision. This is presented to the board 3 business days prior to the meeting. It is just as important as reviewing the agenda, as reviewing the board packet, and reviewing this information ahead of time and asking any questions they may have to the manager prior to the meeting. This way, all board members are prepared to discuss and vote on the topic at hand. When directors aren't prepared, they spend valuable time asking questions on items that were addressed either in their board packet or questions that weren't discussed prior to the meeting that result in needing further investigation. Both these situations often result in items being tabled, so the board can review after the meeting or the community manager can explore further. when these items get tabled, this creates further delays in planning and projects being completed in a timely fashion. Effectiveness is really all about board members keeping informed and making informed decisions. This requires directors to invest time and attention to association matters by not only attending, but coming prepared to each meeting. Now I'll turn it over to Melissa, who will speak on the importance of not only being prepared, but also making those informed decisions at the board meeting.
Yes, legal lesson number 5. This is so important, and I always talk about this in any class I teach, whether it's about meetings or covenant enforcement or collections or how to pass a special assessment, whatever it is really, really important for board members to make informed decisions, because failure to make informed decisions leads to claims of breach of fiduciary duty. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, fiduciary duty, what that means, when I usually ask people what that means, they just think money. They state money or power or whatever. So a fiduciary is a person that's in a position of trust, and you're entrusted with the assets of the association, with making sure you both preserve the assets, you collect the assessments, you maintain the property. And I think a lot of board members forget that when they get on the board, they're running a business. And so you're in charge of a lot of money. And whenever there's a decision, I keep going back to decisions about money, especially large expenses, those are scrutinized quite a bit. And if you're about to go into a board meeting to discuss a potential $100,000 expense or whatever it is, you better be prepared, and you better not just kind of sit there and say, okay, nod your head because so-and-so thinks it's okay, so I should be okay with it. You know, you need to be involved. You took the position as a board member, and once you became a board member, you're a fiduciary. And I'm sorry if you didn't take the position to be a board member and you just left during the annual meeting, you went to the bathroom, and all of a sudden you come out of the annual meeting and out of the bathroom and you've been elected president. I have seen that happen a couple of times. They wait till the person leaves and all of a sudden they're on the board. You know, I'm sorry for those of you who are in that position, but you are now on the board. And you're spending a lot of money for the association. So breach of fiduciary duty means that you didn't follow the various duties that fiduciaries are required to follow in order to act for the association. There's a number of them, but I wanted to talk about the duty of care. Now, this is a requirement. This is a requirement for board members to act in good faith, prudently, and I bolded that because that's what we're talking about now, and in the best interest of the association. This is the standard of care that if your decision is challenged, the court's going to look at this and say, okay, did the board make that decision according to this standard? Now, we can talk about the duty of care for a whole class, but really today we're talking about that second bullet point, which is prudently. Making an informed decision. It just means ask a lot of questions. Make sure that you know what you're saying yes to. If somebody decides to sue the association, or God forbid they sue the board or the individual board members, you want to know that you made that decision in an informed manner, because you're going to be protected if you did. So prudently means ask a lot of questions. Make sure that you rely on opinions. It's not like you have to go out and be an attorney and figure out how to read these ambiguous documents. If you need to make a decision that involves a legal question that you're not comfortable with, ask the attorney. If you're about to enter in this huge construction project, discuss that, have the expert contractor. If you were about to enter into a loan, and that's coming up in your next board packet and board meeting, then make sure that you have your loan person, your HOA loan expert there to answer any questions so you can make that prudent decision. I can't emphasize that enough, because if you are able to make those decisions in a prudent manner, and in good faith and in the best interest of the association, then the courts are going to protect you. You are going to be protected from individual liability. And that's even if the decision is wrong. So you ask all these questions, you hire an HOA attorney and you get a legal opinion. and then somebody challenges it and it's wrong. Of course, that opinion couldn't be something that I gave because I always give correct legal opinions. But let's say you get a wrong legal opinion, then the court says they're wrong. It doesn't matter for you individually as a board member because you relied on that expert, and you will be protected from liability if you make an informed decision. So just courts don't want to second guess board members. They don't want to hold you liable for your decisions as long as you make them according to the standard, because they know that if you were held liable for your decisions, then no one would serve. It would show the potential pool of people that would serve. So what are some of the consequences of not making an informed decision? Well, of course, we already discussed decisions get tabled. If you're not prepared and you come to this meeting, you're not ready to make that decision, or at least ask the critical questions, then it's going to be tabled. And I just want to throw in that if you're missing 2-3 board meetings in a row, I think you have a duty to resign, because it's not doing anybody any good if you're not showing up to these meetings prepared and ready to make a decisions. Poor decisions are made if you don't read that board packet, and Diversified gives it 3 days ahead. That's more than enough time for you to read the packet. Loss of credibility. If you don't, especially if homeowners are there and they're observing the decision-making process, and you don't even know what you're voting on, or all the questions that could have been answered before are now coming to light, it's going to result in a loss of credibility. And decisions subject to challenge. If you don't make a prudent decision, I'll give that example again of a legal opinion or asking the expert to give you that information. And then it's subject to challenge because somebody else might have looked at the documents and realized, gosh, you did that wrong. And then all of a sudden you're unraveling all those decisions, and you could be exposed to liability again for breach of fiduciary duty if you don't act according to the standard of care. It's not very hard to do. Last thing I want to say on it is that you need to paper trail those decisions. So again, get that legal opinion, get that expert report, make sure it's in the minutes that you did discuss it with the attorney or whatever.
Wonderful, thanks, Melissa. And then finally, we're gonna speak on board meeting conflicts. You know, we touched on the various types of meetings and their purpose, preparation and documentation of the meeting. And so finally, conflict. You know, conflicts are inevitable and are a part of all relationships between individuals who work together. So let's start with internal conflict of the board. This never happens, right? We never see internal board conflict. No, it does, it happens. The board is made up of various personalities, experience levels, and professional backgrounds. And these differerences are what makes the board well-rounded and effective. However, these differences can also create internal conflict. So when this type of conflict could potentially arise, it's important to do a few things. The first is focus on clear, objective, accurate communication. Many conflicts result from unclear instructions or responses to questions. Work to write and speak in a clear, objective style that identifies and uses accurate and complete information. And additionally, allow each board member's opinions to be heard and acknowledged. Don't discount another's ideas, even if you disagree with them. We're all in this together. Next would be split the work fairly. Every volunteer on your board of directors has made a unique commitment to serve your community. To ensure that no one is overburdened with more responsibilities than they committed themselves to complete, weigh each task according to length, difficulty, expertise before assigning it to a director. You know, we've seen a lot of board members who will separate out their responsibilities based on different types, such as maybe reserve funding oversight, landscaping, exterior maintenance. And we've seen that by splitting up this work, it really does alleviate that potential conflict from the board. And of course, remember that Diversified's here to support you as the board as well. We understand, we get it. You guys are homeowner volunteers, and we're here to take that burden off the board whenever possible. Don't burn yourself out on tasks that your community manager can be assisting with. Next is understand the problem and be solution-minded when discussing. One of the best ways to avoid conflict is not to blame other board members for problems that arise. Instead, find the cause of the problem and make a team plan to solve it. Remember, separate the person from the problem. And finally, keep your fiduciary duties in mind. As Melissa was stating about duty of care, each board member is also charged with a duty of loyalty and duty to act in the scope of your authority. Essentially meaning, as a board member, your ultimate responsibility is to put the interest of the association as a whole at the forefront. Focus on the actions you, the board, have the authority to oversee and continue to make decisions in a fair, informed manner. Ultimately, the needs of the community must come before your own suggestions and opinions. Now, as we're all aware, conflict doesn't just occur internally between board members, but it also appears between the board and homeowners. The board can take some actions to assist in avoiding this conflict with homeowners ahead and be proactive. The first step is communication and transparency. I can't stress this enough about how important this is for a board and for the homeowners. We see conflicts avoided when board members utilize proper and consistent communication and transparency on association matters. This means utilizing communication tools such as email blasts, newsletters, portals, and posted notices to assist in communicating important association details, as well as ensuring that all actions of the board are done through transparency to the owners, along with education as to why decisions, especially difficult ones, are made. This is especially important when talking about possible major assessment increases or large-scale exterior maintenance projects. Ensuring that you are proactive with preemptive communication and education to the community is just going to assist you in heading off any conflict and headaches and angered homeowners. The next is understanding that that you need to allow the association to evolve. Conflicts can arise at board meetings when a newer faction of an HOA board doesn't agree with previous board methods or decisions. It's important for everyone to realize that associations evolve over time to meet the changing needs of a community. Keeping an open mind and periodically revisiting rules or regulations that may have become outdated is a very important function of the board. And finally, follow through. If the board has previously agreed or stated they would act on a specific concern or item, ensure that this is being followed through on. If for some reason the board isn't able to act in that direction originally stated, make sure that you're communicating to the owners as to why. A good example of this is this year. I know many planned phased maintenance projects were put on hold due to the high increases of materials or paint or lumber, and just making sure that this is communicated to the owners of why this phased work wasn't done this year but is maybe scheduled next year is just going to set off everybody on the right path forward. So all this is great, right? But as I mentioned earlier, conflict is inevitable and it is unavoidable. So in the instances that maybe there is some board or homeowner conflict at the board, the first step is just to stay calm, respectful, and polite. If you're confronted by an angry or upset board member or homeowner, it's very important just to separate yourself from the problem and stay objective. This mindset will allow you to find the source of the issue so it can be dismantled. Plus, your polite gravity will also help calm them, which will make discussing the issue even easier. Next is ask questions to find the underlying cause of the conflict so you can solve it. First, listen to everything the individual has to say and empathize with their problem. We're all human. We all get frustrated, and usually there's a deeper underlying level that's there other than just that initial frustration. Then repeat the main points of the problem to make sure you have understood completely. And then once you've completed that, you'll be able to ask for the appropriate information to resolve the conflict, which might include the priority of results, the next steps, deadlines, resources needed. And then finally, this will prepare you to be able to suggest solutions and work with the other directors to solve the problem. Keep in mind that a board is not required to make decisions to issues brought up at board meetings by the homeowner right then and there. It's usually best that the board isn't reactive with their response, but rather takes the time to fully understand and evaluate various approaches. Thank the member for their input and make them aware of how the board will communicate their decision and plan once it's decided. And going back to the last slide, follow up. Make sure then that the board does follow up on those steps and explains to the owner if a different path is taken. And finally, utilize a third party. You know, sometimes there may occur where there is some internal board conflict or homeowner issues that isn't a clear, you know, agreed upon course of action to approach. And this is where calling in a third party to maybe provide different approaches, recommendations, or solutions might be helpful. We at Diversified, your community management company, we're always willing to lend a hand and maybe speak on experiences, as well as if there's legal opinions that needed, this is a great time to utilize your general counsel. And then with that, I'm going to virtually toss it back to Melissa to speak on a little bit more on handling that conflict at board meetings.
I like how she ended with turn it over to your general counsel, because I'll just say, you know what, everybody, just listen to me and just shut up, and I'm just going to tell you what you need to do. I've been in situations where the board, I mean facetious obviously, but where the board has wanted me to be there just because sometimes a third party doesn't even need to say anything. Just the presence of the third party is enough for people to calm down and to realize, you know what, it's gotten out of hand and that third party can help. Also, just throwing onto that third party issue, there's mediators out there as well that are fantastic, and they can find out what the real issue is between the board members or the board member and the homeowner. I was in a situation once where I had no idea that this has been festering for so long, and within 5 minutes, whatever has happened in the past between these two board members, I had one board member that was hurling himself across the table at another board member, and it just, I don't know where that came from. I did not know the history, but obviously these things have been festering for quite some time, and hopefully that's not something that you deal with all the time, but it's indicative of a long history of allowing that kind of behavior to happen and not using some of those fantastic techniques that were just discussed in the last couple slides. Over communicating, being transparent, being respectful and polite. Not everybody's interests are going to align with one another. Not everybody's going to agree. You know, the opinions are opinions, and then you vet them. There's such good thing as good conflict, where you're just debating and you're vetting the issue, and versus bad conflict, which is, you know, hurling yourself across the table. But I just want to emphasize that as a board, you run the show at the board meetings, and it's important that you know that role and that you understand that you're empowered to do things that will make that meeting go smoothly and prep before the meeting so that things get smoothly, especially if you know that something's going to be a heated discussion. So first of all, we talked previously about adopting and following a conduct of meetings policy. Now that's actually required. You're required to have a conduct of meetings policy under Colorado law, along with several other policies, but it's really intended to, again, provide some structure and ground rules. And if you know there's going to be a heated discussion and there's going to be conflict, I would take that conduct of meetings policy, and in the beginning of the meeting, I would read those ground rules, and I would remind everybody, this is what we have to follow. This policy, like any other policy or any other rule or regulation, is enforceable. And if they violate it, there's different things that you can do to enforce the violations of that policy. So make sure you have, make sure that you have somebody that's presiding over that meeting that actually does follow the conduct of meetings policy. The last thing we want is just the policy to be adopted and nobody to be following it. That's going to go to losing credibility as a board over that consequence thing. But there's things like, you know, time frames. If a homeowner's there during homeowner forum and they want to hijack the meeting, you can say, nope, you know, in the interest of everybody's time, we're going to move forward. This is the time frame that you have. If a lot of people are coming to those meetings and you have 50 people there because they're all upset about the fact that you, under COVID times, you close the swimming pool or whatever it is, you can limit it. You can say a reasonable number of people can speak. Not 50 people for 5 hours. These are things you can build into and follow in your conduct of meetings policy. If somebody is using foul language, you can get that bad behavior. You should get that bad behavior in the minutes. So you should be saying, Mr. Smith, You know, it says right here in the conduct of meetings policy that you shouldn't be using foul language. Whatever the violation is, say it in the minutes so that if you have to take more aggressive action in the future, you have this paper trail showing that here's all the bad behavior that we couldn't control through the meeting, and we need to take more aggressive action against this particular person. As was already stated, there's no requirement to act at these board meetings if you're faced with these questions and you don't have the answers. A lot of times you don't have the answers. Don't feel pressured to provide answers or to act or to set up unreasonable expectations because you're acting based on no information. You're just acting in response to a particularly, a screaming homeowner, for example. And you do have the ability to adjourn. You don't have to keep going. If it continues and continues, then say, we're going to adjourn the meeting. You are empowered to do that, and you should do that. If it's just deteriorating into a shouting match, there's nothing that's going to happen today. People have to step back. The other thing, real quickly, a practical technique is, I use this sometimes at annual meetings, and I sometimes do it at board meetings too. If somebody is screaming, they're not going to keep screaming if you turn on your phone and you record it. Say, I want to understand and I want to get this on record. They don't want to sound like that because they know it's on record. So that's kind of a good technique. So consequences if you don't take charge at a board meeting: decisions aren't made, lack of action. If you don't drive the agenda, if you don't handle, if you're not prepared to meet the likely debate or hostile discussion, if you're not prepared for that, then nothing's going to happen because you're flustered or you're going to adjourn. And you should have these stock phrases and you should have these manners in which you can be respectful, but also say we have to respect everybody's time and move on. But if you don't take charge, it's not going to happen. Your decisions are going to be tabled. You might be fostering bully behavior, and I say you might be, but it's probably likely. If this happens a lot, then that means there's somebody or more than one person that are instigating it, and you might not even know it. It's an obvious bully to have somebody screaming and browbeating somebody. That's easy. You got to nip it in the bud, but that's easy to recognize. There are other kinds of bullies, are the ones that might bully you with information, bully you with their knowledge. The know-it-all person that starts out as the advocate and then ends up looking over your shoulder at everything and micromanaging and all of that. That leads to the conflict because you're so frustrated by that kind of behavior. And so the consequence of that is you might lose the board members. They don't want to be on the same board with this person. You might lose the potential of homeowners to serve on the board. You might lose vendors. You might lose your management company just because they don't want to deal with a situation where it continues on and on. So you need to nip that in the bud, both at the meeting and hopefully before that, if you know what's going to happen, and use all those techniques. Otherwise, you'll also lose credibility as a board. Once they see this is happening and nothing's happening because of it, then why should we follow you as members? You know, we're just going to remove you or recall you, which might be something that you want to happen anyway. But to succeed, take charge of that meeting and use those techniques that we were discussing in the last slides.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. And that kind of concludes our All Things Meeting presentation for this evening. I do want to first extend a few thank yous. I want to thank Brittany Murray, the Diversified Office Manager, for assisting with us with this, the tech and everything. And then, of course, the other Director of Team Development, Phil Benton, who has been overseeing the chat features and answering all of your guys' great questions. Of course, Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to provide just such valuable information to us all. And finally, thank you, board members. You know, we wouldn't be here without you guys and your partnership and ensuring that, you know, each day that, you know, those community needs are met and working together. So thank you for your volunteer efforts and your time. On the screen, you'll see Melissa's contact as well as Diversified's. Please feel free to contact Melissa or your community manager for any follow-up questions from this evening. And I hope you guys all have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.